Good evening. This is Robert Sungenis coming to you once again on the Robert Sungenis live program. Today for July 29, 2020. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as the host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability from the sources of our Catholic Church, our tradition, the scripture, science, history, whatever will help me to satisfy you, to give an answer to that most pressing question that you have. I'm glad you could join us tonight. And last night we had a great time again with your questions, and we didn't get through them all, that's for sure. And so, as I promised, I want to try to get to some of them tonight and try to answer them as quickly as I can. There are a couple matters I want to talk about, however, just for about 15 minutes maybe. One is somebody wrote me an email today and said that they still don't know how to ask questions on this new forum that we have. So, I do not want to leave anybody in the lurch out there. So, Jonathan, if you're listening, or maybe Lawrence, or anybody else who's asked a question on here, you know how to do it. So if you would, maybe type it out for me, try to get ahead of the other people here, do it real quick, and explain how someone asks a question on this program. So that's number one. Number two, last night we had a question about Mary, and I heard from somebody. I may not have answered that as precisely as I should have. And, sometimes on a live program like this, I may not say everything that's needed, or I might muff up something that is needed and was said. Oh, here goes my camera, so let me fix that. All right. Okay. I think that's going to be secure. At any rate, about Mary. Okay, so, the Catholic Church in her history is famous and well adept for making the proper distinctions in theology. And those distinctions are important because sometimes theology can be very confusing, to be very honest with you, okay? If you've ever wanted to jump into something that may take you here, there, and everywhere, and sometimes when you don't know where you end up, try theology. It's not like mathematics, 2 + 2 = 4. Although if you explain it correctly, maybe it should be, okay? But getting to the correct answer, that's the problem in theology sometimes. And so you may end up with something that looks like, 2 + 2 is not equaling 4. At any rate, the analogies just take us so far to try to explain the difficulties that we encounter in theology and biblical study. I mean, just look at the mess that has come about, even though this is Jesus' church and it's survived for 2,000 years. It hasn't been easy, okay? I mean, we had the split with the Eastern Orthodox, 1054. We had the Protestants around 1500, and every denomination that made, and we had splits in, all the heresies that were bandied about in the first 4 centuries when the church was trying to hammer out who Jesus was, basically. And so there has been a lot of bloodshed and a lot of unfortunate circumstances, let's put it that way. We're trying to figure out the correct theology. And sometimes the church didn't arrive at the correct understanding of something for centuries, literally centuries, sometimes millennia. Okay, so in that sense, it hasn't been easy. Mary was one of those. And the reason why Mary was one of those is because not much information about Mary in Scripture. Okay, every Catholic has to realize that. Though we basically put Mary on a pedestal, and a worthy pedestal, a lot of this comes from theological ruminations and trying to connect the dots together correctly, and you come up with something like the Assumption of Mary. Okay, and that is not something that is in the Bible at all. Okay, at least something direct and explicit that we can say, oh, here's chapter and verse. Mary was assumed into heaven. Okay, but this is a theological doctrine that comes after many, many centuries of hashing it out back and forth, and the Pope finally coming out with a statement in 1950. Almost 2,000 years after Mary walked the earth, about what the Assumption really was. And so, as you see, a lot of doctrines lay in the lumberyard of the Catholic Church for a long time before they are actually dogmatized, and everybody pretty much knows what the story is. Okay. Prior to that, there's a lot of discussion. And this is, as I said, the nature of theology. It's sometimes very hard to get to the right answer. And so we should be fortunate, happy that this is one of the great things about the Catholic Church is, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we pick up the Bible or have a theological discussion, because these things have already been hammered out by our forefathers. And thank God they did. And this is why the Protestants have so much confusion, because everybody that doesn't like the church they're in goes and starts another church, and they have to reinvent the wheel again. They have to go back to the original. Well, who's Jesus? Are we going to say the same thing that the previous denomination said that we came from? A lot of times they don't. Somebody thinks he has a new wrinkle to who Jesus was, and that's just one of the doctrines. Man, what a tough job they have. So we should be happy that we're not with them, because all these things for 2,000 years have been hammered out, and we can hang our hat on them. And one of those things, of course, is the Assumption of Mary, the Immaculate Conception, the perpetual virginity, all those things. And these are a lot of doctrines the Catholic liberals are trying to do away with, by the way. And just thought I'd mention that. But so last time we were dealing with, Mary being immaculately conceived. And I was trying to make the point that though Mary was born without original sin, that's the basis of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. We have to make the proper distinctions, as I said, and one of those distinctions we have to make is that though Mary wasn't born with original sin, she, as a child of Adam, suffers from the major effects of original sin, just like Jesus would, even though he was not. He wasn't born in sin and never sinned. He suffered from the effects of Adam's sin, and so did Mary, and so did everybody in the human race. So I just want to make that point clear. That I think I mentioned the soul body or body of Mary. Though Mary's body, was not hampered by the original sin that would have been in her soul if she wasn't immaculately conceived. Okay. In other words, she would have had concupiscence, and, that's one of the major things that our body suffers with original sin. The proclivity, as the church says, the proclivity to sin. And she didn't have that. Okay. But what she did suffer with, as Jesus also suffered with, and that's why he died, is death. Okay. Death is a consequence of Adam's sin. This is why God said to him, "In the day you eat of it, you shall die." Okay. So Mary and Jesus are saved from the spiritual death. Okay. But there's also the physical death that they were not saved from. Okay. So we have to make that proper distinction. And if I said anything that was incorrect yesterday or wasn't clear enough, I hope what I've just said here smooths that over, because there's one thing we need to be clear on is, our Catholic doctrine. So now, what's the other thing? Today, this COVID thing has been raging for months now, and it's just getting worse instead of better because the whole thing has been politicized. And it just so happens that it appears that those on the left, politically, culturally, ideologically, have this kind of, they have a different view than those on the right. The difference is the left seems to be playing this thing up like no tomorrow. And one of the examples or evidences of this is their treatment of the drug hydroxychloroquine. I wrote an little article today, just a page and a half, about this drug based on a video I saw that was on Bitchute. Now, Bitchute has become the go-to place for everybody else that's been knocked off of, Google or YouTube or Twitter or whatever. And it's run by Breitbart. And, though there's been some kind of controversy about Breitbart, I think it's all blown up out of proportion. They have said some things that are wrong, but hey, everybody does, okay? By and large, Breitbart and their outlet Bitchute, thank God we have them, because our liberal media has been shutting us out left and right. And I don't mean that in a pun way. I mean that figuratively. So I wrote this article about hydrochloroquine, and based on this video I saw of about 12 doctors who stood in front of the Supreme Court building a couple days ago, Monday, 27th, and just basically poured their hearts out and explained why hydrochloroquine is such a good drug. And basically what it does is it goes up and opens up the lung passages, the alveoli, so that the zinc can get in there and stop this COVID virus from doing its dastardly deeds by blocking the alveoli and having them fill up with water and to the point where someone can't breathe, and then they die. And this hydroxychloroquine has been around for over 50 years. It's been used for many different applications, from malaria to, whatever. And they're testifying. As a matter of fact, one of the doctors got up and said that Lancet, the premier medical magazine, the journal, I should say, in the world, had published an article, I think it was back in April. And the article was making the claim that hydroxychloroquine was actually not beneficial at all, and it was dangerous. Okay? And after 2 weeks, Lancet, the editor of Lancet, head editor, withdrew the article, took the article out, and it's no longer there. Why? Well, he said because it was filled with fake scientific data. Okay? Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that there are powerful forces out there that want to keep this drug from the public so that they can't be cured. Why? Well, because we have an election coming up. Okay? And the worst that can make Trump look and put the blame on him for why this, we just saw it today with Joe Biden. That Trump doesn't know how to handle the COVID virus. So the longer they can prolong this COVID virus, at least up until the election, the better chances there are of making this guy look like a total jerk who doesn't know what he's doing. Okay? And they took Twitter took a article from Donald Trump Jr. off because he was testifying to hydrochloroquine based on probably the same information that I got. Okay? So in my article, I put the link for these 12 or so doctors who stood in front of the Supreme Court and gave this information, the whole gamut, for about an hour. So, Lawrence, and we'll put that up as soon as possible, probably be up there tomorrow. So please go read my little article, see all the political ramifications that are surrounding this COVID thing, and look at the video. The reason this is so good is because hydrochloroquine is used as a preventative medicine, so that if you do happen to get the COVID virus, the medicine's already there to just nullify, and it does it rather quick. There was a doctor who, from Nigeria, and she was on fire. And she says, look, I'm the one who deals with this firsthand. I've had 350 COVID patients. I've given them all hydrochloroquine, and not one of them has died. Okay? Says, I know what's happening. And the people come in, she said, all worried that, they're going to die, and she gives them, and you take a tablet, if you can find it in the United States. You can hardly find it. I don't know if they said every week you take a tablet or you take 2 tablets every week just to keep the hydrochloroquine in your system so that in case you get the COVID, the COVID has no chance of surviving. And it's a miracle drug in that sense. Okay? Now, this is why the left hates it. This is why they have, without any reason whatsoever, they have castigated this drug as some kind of, something that's going to destroy, your whatever in your body. And it's not good for, it has so many side effects. It doesn't have any side effects. It's like drinking, see, and they did tests, okay, and then what happens is, these doctors will explain, they gave too much of the hydrochloroquine. They gave 2,400 milligrams when you should only have 200. If you do that with any drug, even penicillin, you're going to have problems. Too much of anything. So, but they did that purposely. They gave too much of the drug, and it caused side effects. Yeah, well, see, we know what's going on, don't we? Okay? So, I'm just telling you, for your own sake, for your family's sake, listen to the video. If you are frightened about COVID, and that's what they want you to be. They want you to be frightened. So you start thinking emotionally now, not rationally. And you want to point the finger to, because that's where they're pointing the finger. They're pointing it to Donald Trump. So this is all engineered. Okay? And it's funny that this virus came along right, 6 months, 8 months before the election. And the first thing the Democrats do is want to blame Donald Trump. And Nancy Pelosi, our favorite Catholic, Nancy Pelosi, is out there saying it's the Trump virus. Okay, so, and we know what she's all about. This woman never met a baby she didn't want to abort, and yet, proclaims to be a Catholic, a practicing Catholic. So these people have no sense of what Catholicism is anymore. And it's just a label that they put on themselves because that's how they grew up. Joe Biden's the same way, you know. I wrote an article about him a while ago, and he just basically said, look, I'm Catholic, but I condone abortion because that's what my party believes in. Can you imagine that? So this is a man of no convictions, which means that if he becomes president, he's going to be basically told what to do because he's going to follow the Democratic Party and all their left-wing ideology, which is getting worse by the year. And so we're in tough times. And I was very upset about it today, and I wanted to share it with you because it affects you directly, politically and medically. Okay, they're withholding a drug from you that works. Even when you get COVID in the first initial stages, you take the hydroxychloroquine and it arrests it. Okay, now after the COVID virus has dug itself in, you've had it for weeks or months. Yeah, you're going to have to suffer with it. And even then, the death count among those that are healthy is minimal. Like any virus, it attacks the weak. And, this has been true of every virus that we've had. No, it's no different with COVID. But unlike those viruses, we found scientific evidence that hydroxychloroquine arrests it, even in the early stages, and can prevent it from even taking foot in your lungs. So it would behoove you, when Lawrence puts that article up there, to read it and listen to every word they say on that video, because they all had something important to say, all the doctors that testified. These are practicing medical professionals. They're in the labs, they're in the offices seeing the patients. They're seeing what's going on. And they're not up in their ivory towers, making medical decisions based on political ideology. This is real down-to-earth medicine. So, just wanted to say that. And I think that was it. Somebody else had written in a couple of questions. The very person, his name is Tim, who couldn't figure out how to ask a question here. So we will do that here. He says, how and when were the craters of the moon and Mercury formed? Were they formed during the creation, during the fall, or during the flood? Are they impact craters or volcanic craters? Might they have been formed when water or ice fell from the windows of heaven during the flood? Okay, so basically what we know of lunar craters is that almost 100% of them are not volcanic. They are created by asteroids and meteors. That makes sense because, we do have an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter with thousands, tens of thousands of rocks, basically. Some big, some small, some medium, that every once in a while, gets out of orbit. And they get out of orbit because they're so small. And, or there might be a gravitational perturbation among the planets that sort of shifts the gravity to the point where it jostles an asteroid, and since it's so small, it can get out of orbit. Okay, and a lot of them, would hit the moon because we're not too far from Mars. In speaking of millions of miles, sometimes we get very close to Mars. Okay. And sometimes, of course, we're very far away. But when we get close, that's the opportunity for these asteroids to get loose, and they will, bombard the moon, as we see quite clearly. There is no evidence of volcanic activity on the moon, so we can dismiss that as a possibility. And as far as when it occurred, who knows? I mean, it of course didn't occur during the creation. Okay, I would say most likely it's occurring when the greatest catastrophe the world has ever seen, Noah's flood, occurred, because there might have been some adjustments, some kind of movement that God made among the celestial bodies in this time. And if that's the case, well, we have, evidence of a catastrophe, it looks like at least, in this asteroid belt. Because if you think a little bit, where did they come from? It's not likely that God made, tens of thousands of pieces of rock in the position between Mars and Jupiter. It's more likely that maybe there was a planet there, and somehow it just blew apart and created all these asteroids that we have. Okay? We don't know. Okay? And things like this, the Bible doesn't touch, church doesn't touch. We have to depend on scientists, but, the scientists don't believe in Noah's flood. They do everything to try to get away from it because they don't want to believe in catastrophism. They want what they call uniformitarianism. That is, they want everything to be on an even keel so we can get these layers of the geologic column built up, so that we can have our little chronology of evolution. And so they're totally against catastrophism. Okay? So, we're left with our best guesses on this. That's all we can say. All right? So, now, let me go back to some of the questions that were left over from yesterday. And let me try to adjust this so I can see it better. All right. So someone says, hi, Dr. Sungenis. Question. I understand that you've said in prior shows that canonizations are not included under papal infallibility. Can you explain more? I read differing opinions on this issue. Well, the fact that you've read differing opinions, and I assume from people that are assuming to be authoritative on this issue, because you shouldn't be writing on it unless you feel you have some authority to write on it. Well, the fact that all these authorities have different opinions shows you that the church hasn't made a definitive statement on it. Otherwise, if they had a differing opinion, they would be in heresy. Okay? So that's a logical point we need to make. I've looked at this sufficiently enough many years ago from the Catholic Encyclopedia, no less, the 1911 edition. And it gave varying opinions. Okay? And some of them sound more cogent than others, but the church has just decided not to come down and make a definitive statement on it. We've all assumed, and probably, it's good to assume in that sense, because, we have saints and we've honored them. I don't want somebody to come along and telling me that, St. Thomas is not a saint because, we found some new evidence. But in our day and age, things have changed. Okay? Now, the Pope, John Paul II, didn't say that canonizations are under infallibility, but he did change the requirements for canonizations to make them a lot easier than they were for the prior 2,000 years. Okay? Prior 2,000 years, you had to have 3 miracles, and they had to be obvious miracles. Not like the one that got John Paul sainted, where some woman had Parkinson's disease, and supposedly she was cured by praying to John Paul II. Well, how do you prove that? Parkinson's disease, they don't even know that much about Parkinson's disease or what cures it. People have been cured by from Parkinson's disease without even being given medication. And, so it's one of those kind of, wow, what's going on diseases. So to use that for a bona fide miracle to make someone a saint, and that's the only miracle that they could come up with. And even that miracle is shaky. Okay? So it's ironic that the very person that's trying to lessen the requirements for sainthood is the very person whose evidence looks the most skeptical. So, that's one thing. And then, of course, he took away the devil's advocate. The devil's advocate was such a integral part of determining in this cold and cruel world whether the things that were claimed about a certain person were actually true. Because when you get into those kinds of arenas, the legends and myths that begin to occur around a certain person, especially after that person's died, and the people, feel some kind of, closeness with this person who lived this good life, and stories start to mount, and they start to be exaggerated, proliferated, and the devil's advocate is the one who has to get in there and sort out fact from fiction. And sometimes it takes a long time. And there's been many saints who have been put on, many candidates for sainthood who have been put on the shelf for that very reason. And yet some of them turned out to be, legit. Like Saint Robert Bellarmine. He wasn't canonized till 1934. Okay? 300 and some odd years after he died. And here's one of the greatest apologists the church has ever known. So, that's how strict the church was with canonizations. And maybe one reason for that was because the church had never declared that canonizations are infallible. Maybe she did her due diligence because she knew that the responsibility was on her to make sure that whoever she called a saint was truly a saint. And this is important for us as Catholics because, someone will say, well, what's sainthood? It just means you're going to heaven. Not quite, okay? That's part of it. But when you're declared a saint, that means that people can pray to you for spiritual favors and expect you, whatever your recourse is to God, being in heaven, can turn his favor your way for the person who's praying to you. However it happens in heaven, okay? So that means a lot. We're praying to somebody and they're not really, we don't know whether they're in heaven or not. That's not good. Not good for the church at all. So this is why the church was very strict about canonizations. So now, we have no devil's advocate. So basically, all the positive information is put forth, and there's no one to go through it and say, this looks good, but, no proof to it. And, looks like it's a little exaggerated. Nobody to do that anymore. Okay. So this is why John Paul II had more saints canonized in his pontificate, 26-year pontificate, than all the popes combined before him. Okay? So something is amiss. And this is the facts. These are the facts. So, yeah, I have I'm very skeptical about it. I'm not saying that it isn't, as I've said before on this show, this is my opinion. You want my opinion? I'm giving you my opinion. I don't run the church. I'm just a parishioner who hopes that, someday I'll get to heaven if I follow what the church teaches, what the Bible teaches, what our tradition teaches. But it's my opinion. But if you disagree with my opinion, you're going to have some evidence to back it up. And I've talked to some people about this, and those that believe that canonizations are infallible, it's more emotional than it is intellectual. Okay, so fact is, church has not come out with a definitive statement. If someone wants to prove me wrong somewhere and say, here it is, you missed this one, Bob, I'm all ears, because I only want the truth. Okay, all right, let me go on. How am I doing on time here? Okay. I know a lot of you have asked questions on the board there, and I'll get to those as soon as I can. Someone just checked with the Kolbe Center website and didn't see a mention of the event you referred to. Will you please get the info and share it on tomorrow night's program? Well, that's tonight. Write Hugh Owen an email. It's howen@shentel.com. Shentel is SHENTEL.com. It's Owen, OWEN, at shentel.com. Yeah, I think it's com. And ask him. Okay? So, I hope he doesn't mind me giving out his email. But I'm sure he wants a lot of people to attend. He wants a lot more people to get interested in this. And now you have to pay, to get in. You're going to have to pay for your hotel and your food, because the place that we had, the original place that it was going to be was in Corpus Christi, Texas. But the bishop there, because of the COVID, says, we can't have it there. So we had to, scurry around trying to find a new place. We found it in near St. Louis. So, again, I didn't look up the name of the city, Visalia or something like that. I forget. But you have Hugh's email now. Write him an email, ask him about it. I'm sure he'll be glad to give it to you. He'll also put you on the email list, and you'll get his weekly letters from the Kolbe Center. And they're very good, by the way. So, all right. Can you talk about your disagreements on justification, salvation, predestination with Father Most? Briefly, I'll do it briefly. I hope people remember who Father Most was. Father William Most, a priest, of course, but a theologian kind of priest. And he was very, he tried very hard to keep any kind of human effort out of us being saved. To the point where, gosh, this is many years ago. When did he die? um, almost 20 years ago. Okay. So I'm just going to remember bits and pieces of what our contentions were. But it was sad because right after I wrote my last letter to him, he died 2 weeks after. So I hope it wasn't my letter. But yeah, he didn't like me too much because I just kept pestering him about this because I just believed he was on the wrong track, because he just put too much stress on this idea that we can't do anything to be saved, and he would have this theory that our works are sort of retroactive in counting for justification. And I just said, Father, why are you going to these lengths? What is it? I mean, can't you just understand that we go into it without trying to put God in debt? And because of that, we can have God's grace that looks at us in a totally different way, so that you don't have to go to these lengths to try to make coming to justification an issue where you can't possibly do any work whatsoever or have any thoughts in that direction. And yeah, and no other Catholic theologian I have read stressed this kind of thing that Father Most was trying to stress. And maybe I should go back and look at the letters. They're somewhere in my boxes. I have the letters from Father Most and what I wrote to him. But that's just the gist of it, okay? And I really don't want to go into any more of it unless I have the material in front of me. So, and I'm pressed for time here, so let me go on. Somebody says, why is an infant baptized in the Catholic Church bound to follow all the church teachings? Well, why wouldn't they be? I don't understand your question. I don't mean to laugh at it. I'm just saying it just seems obvious that we become the member of the church. The church has rules, and obviously, if you're a member, your members are bound to obey the rules. So that's true with any organization you have. Why would it be different with the Catholic Church? Now, if you say infant, is that different from an adult baptized in the Catholic Church? He's bound to follow the church teachings. So are you mentioning infant baptism as opposed to adult baptism for some reason? And if so, I don't know why. Because an infant, he's going to have to grow into the church. He's going to reach the age of accountability at 7 years old, and now he's accountable for all his sins. So it's a progression of knowledge that he has and culpability. But you're going to have to come back and explain your question a little bit more, because I'm guessing there's more behind your question than is apparent to me right now. Okay. Keep going. I'm keeping going here. Would you rather have a conversation about God over coffee with Lawrence Krauss or Michio Kaku? Oh, well, that's a hard one. Michio Kaku would be much more open to talking about God. Lawrence Krauss, he's an atheist. So the only reason I would be more apt to talk to Lawrence Krauss is to show how his atheism is just totally illogical. And Michio, maybe I could base it on his Catholicism that he grew up with. That would be a lot easier. Krauss would be much more of a challenge. So appreciate the question. What else we have here? Why do these questions keep repeating? Looks like you guys would keep posting them on the board there. Can the filioque be described as the Father is the principal cause and the Son is the instrumental cause of the Spirit? Well, I don't remember anybody talking about it that way, okay? Because I don't think it can be dissected. Here's one of those instances where you can't make distinctions, because if you start making distinctions, you're going off the track. I think this would be one of them. It's just a matter of either Father or Father and Son. And no division in the personage of the Trinity. In other words, you can't dissect the Father and have him on a special label as opposed to the Son, trying to make it easier for the Spirit to come from both of them. You just can't do that in this case, okay? There's only two options, Father and Son, or just Father, okay? And as you know, Catholic Church has taught that it's the Father and Son that the Holy Spirit proceeds from. And I don't think even an Eastern Orthodox person is going to say, oh yeah, Father's principal cause, Son's instrumental cause, yeah, that solves the whole thing for us. No, they're not going to go there, okay? It's the Father alone. The Son has nothing to do with it as far as they are concerned, okay? We understand that as a heresy, okay? So no matter how close we are in other aspects, this is a heresy that the Eastern Orthodox have held on to for 1,000 or more years, and that's the way it stands. And I don't think it's going to be solved, because it is so simple. You choose one or the other, as ironic as that may seem. Okay. All right. Doesn't the scripture prove Mary had other children? I have become a stranger to my brothers and alien to my mother's sons. Psalm 69, verse 8, ESV, English Standard Version. No, it doesn't prove it. Okay. It may suggest it, but it doesn't prove it. Okay. Now you said, does the scripture prove Mary had other children? No. Okay. To have proof, it's got to be absolute. Okay. You look at the passage and said, oh, there's no other possible way to interpret this passage. Thus, it's proof. You see. So proof is hard to come by. Okay. Now, there's a lot of passages that suggest that Mary had other children. I mean, you read Matthew 12 and 13, and they actually name, the brothers and sisters of Jesus. So that's suggestive, isn't it? Yeah. And that's why a lot of Protestants get tripped up on it. Okay. But it doesn't prove that they were Mary's children. All right. In other words, when you go into a court of law and you're trying to convict someone on suggestions that it may be the case that you were there and murdered this person, the defense attorney is going to raise his hand and say, that's all speculation, you see. If you want proof, you have to have a picture of him at the scene, that shows them, sticking a knife in the guy's back, or you're going to have the knife with his fingerprints on it, something like that. That's proof. And even that's not proof, because somebody could have put his fingerprints on the knife and made it look like he stabbed him in the back. Okay. So, having proof of something is a lot different than having a suggestion that this may be the case. The fact is, none of these children that are named in Matthew 12, 13, or whatever, are called Mary's children, okay, or Mary's sons or daughters. None of them. The only one that's called Mary's son is Jesus. That says a lot. talking about suggestions, to me that suggests, oh, there's a big distinction. Okay? Because somewhere along the line you would expect these named children, if they were indeed Mary's children, to be called her sons and daughters. But they are not. Okay? Now, there's many other things we can say about that, okay? But we were asking for proof? No, there is no proof. All right, let's see, what else do we have? Do you think it is possible that there is life on other planets? No. The universe was made, the earth was put in the center because we're God's special people. We are the ones that are made in the image of God. He sent one Savior to die for our sins. That's us. Okay? Who was it? Pius II. In the document, forget the name of it. But he said there is no life out there in other worlds. Okay? So we have at least one statement from one pope in an authoritative document that says no life on other planets. Pius II. Hi, Dr. Sungenis. Should the laity be proclaiming that salvation is only through the Catholic faith? If you would give a brief explanation how to proclaim and defend. Well, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, even the Hottentot in Africa, who's never heard the gospel, lives his life, he can be saved. But we can't say that he's saved outside the Catholic faith. Because the Catholic faith allows for salvation to come to someone who is not a formal member of the Catholic Church or has been baptized. That's a belief in the Catholic Church. So it's through that belief that this very Hottentot in Africa can possibly be saved, as Pius IX said. But it's through the graces of the Catholic Church that he's saved, you see. So in that sense, no, it can't be saved outside the Catholic faith, because the Catholic faith has already made provisions for people just like that. Okay? Now, on the other hand, if someone comes along and says, we don't need the Catholic faith in order to be saved, like the Jews were saying back in the time of Eugene IV and Boniface VIII, two popes of the 14th and 15th centuries. That's what they were saying. You know, we're a religion too. You know, we're the Jews. And therefore, we don't need the Catholic Church. We have our own covenant with God. Like they're saying today, as a matter of fact, about the Jews. They don't need the Catholic faith. Well, that's total heresy. Total, absolute heresy. Okay? If a Jew happened to become safe back in that time, and he didn't become a member of the Catholic Church because of no fault of his own, he didn't know about the Catholic Church, or some kind of extenuating circumstance where it's not his fault, he's still saved through the Catholic Church, you see. Anybody who's saved is saved through the Catholic Church. It's either directly or indirectly, okay? Lawrence Krauss received $250,000 from his pal Jeffrey Epstein. That wouldn't surprise me. Hey, Dr. Sungenis, is the First Amendment compatible with the Catholic teaching? I think we dealt with this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? The First Amendment, of course, is the right to free speech and, you know, compatible with Catholic teaching to a certain extent. Okay, but the problem, as good as the First Amendment is to give a level playing field for both the rulers and the ruled, so that the ruled can voice their objections to the rulers that they're not being treated very well. That's the whole reason for the First Amendment, okay? That we can do the same thing in the Catholic Church. You know, Canon 212 says that, If we think our pastors are not only up and up and are doing something wrong, we have the right and duty, it says, to confront them respectfully, politely, but we have the right to confront them. So that's free speech, so to speak, in the Catholic Church from Canon 212. So in that sense, they're compatible. And it's only reasonable societies that would give the ruled the right to voice objections to the rulers. It only makes sense, only logical sense. So we don't have to have the First Amendment of the United States in order to establish that. That's been part of human society for a long time. The societies that suppressed it, like many of them, at one time or another, suppressed it. They had problems. They had revolutions. And people were, the rule people weren't just going to take it anymore. And so they had revolutions. And so instead of disrupting the whole society, it's better to have a provision for the ruled to be able to at least voice their objections. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to get their objections fulfilled, but they have the right to voice them, and maybe they can find someone who is an authority or who has influence or whatever that can get their objections heard and adjudicated. Okay, so that's all good. We can do the same thing in the Catholic Church. But the problem with the First Amendment is that is the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment, is where is the line drawn? Is it just the power of free speech that the person has? And if that's the case, well, then he can talk about atheism, and he can talk about pornography, and he can talk about, insurrection, and he can talk about a lot of things. Because he can basically say anything he wants. Okay? The Catholic Church says no. Your free speech rights are circumscribed by you obeying the laws, the faith and moral laws of the Catholic Church. So that means, no, you don't have a right to talk about pornography or insurrection, things like that. Okay? That's not what free speech rights were ever created to allow. So there's a limitation. But for a society like the United States that doesn't have the strict confines of faith and morals like the Catholic Church does, well, people can say a lot of things and base it on, my free speech. That's not good for the society. And they're finding that out right now, you see, because a lot of these riots that we have now, that's all based on my free speech. Really? Wow. So you see how it can overextend itself. And if there's not parameters put around it, but see, the United States is never going to do that because they don't want any mixture of state and religion. They don't want religion to put parameters around free speech. And they're going to suffer the consequences for it. Okay? So free speech as a principle of freedom, all well and good. Putting strictures around that freedom so that somebody doesn't abuse the freedom, because as we all have heard, with much freedom comes much responsibility. The United States is going to suffer accordingly, as we have seen. All right, let me go on. Is there any grace period for someone who commits a mortal sin to repent, who dies almost immediately after committing a mortal sin? Like 1 minute, 1 day, 1 week. Excuse me. This is why the church teaches, for situations just like this, that, you do certain acts in the church, and you receive certain indulgences, or you receive certain promises, that you will have a priest before you die, so that if you've committed a sin, you have a priest there and you can confess it to. Okay? For exactly this thing. Because you don't know when you're going to die, do you? Okay? So, and to commit a mortal sin, as the church teaches, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to do it willingly. And there can be no excuses. In other words, you are fully committed. And if you're fully committed to commit this sin, it becomes mortal. And so you know that before you sin. So if you happen to die after you commit that mortal sin, well, tough luck for you. Because you already know that to commit a mortal sin, it takes full commitment, premeditated commitment to commit a mortal sin. Okay? And so the church, says mortal sin is very serious, and you really have to know what you're doing to commit one. And of course, there are a lot of priests that abuse that too. They'll say, well, it's really hard to commit a mortal sin because, you have to be fully committed to commit the mortal sin. There can't be anything holding you back and all this stuff. And before you know it, they're making an excuse for someone who's committed mortal sin. That's the wrong way to take it. Okay. But nevertheless, committing a mortal sin means you are committed and you've done something very serious. So if you happen to die, no, there is no grace for you. Okay? It's the very reason that the New Testament says over and over and over again, and the church teaching says over and over to make sure you're in a state of grace every day, because you could be gone like that. Okay? And you can imagine what would happen if someone said, don't worry about it. You got a week to repent of your mortal sin. Well, that means they're not taking it very seriously, number one. Number two, wow. That's called the sin of presumptuous sinning. And if there's anything that God hates worse, it's presumptuous sin. That is a sin that you commit on the pretension that God's going to forgive you. Yeah. That's a guarantee that God won't forgive you if you have pretentious sin. Okay? And that's basically what you're proposing here. Okay? That I can sin and sort of like put it off because, God's going to forgive me when I get around to it. No. That's exactly the kind of person God doesn't want. Okay? So, there you go. Someone says, I watched your debate with the Sedevacantists. That and your comments were very helpful. Do I have to confess calamity if I shared anything they did? I'm not sure what you're talking about there. I can't answer that. I don't know what calamity you're talking about. See if there's any more questions here. Dr. Sungenis, is the Earth spinning on an axis, or is it totally motionless, in your view of geocentrism? Well, it's not my view only, okay? The Church has declared, when this whole issue with Galileo came up, that the Earth is not rotating on an axis and is not revolving around the sun. It is totally motionless. And that's because the Scriptures say so about a dozen times. The Fathers say so in absolute consensus. So do the medievals. And so that's the tradition the church was left with, and that's what she based it on. Okay? And we have that from two popes, Paul V and Urban VIII in the 1600s. So, yes, that's why I believe it, because the church said it. Okay? All right. Do you think the Cephas talked about in Galatians was Peter or another person named Cephas? I've heard a pretty compelling case that is almost certainly someone else. Well, I can tell you very compellingly that it's not someone else, that it is Cephas. Okay, so You get all kinds of people trying to disrupt the traditional understanding of these very simple passages, okay? You can tell by the context that it's Cephas. We know in other passages, 1 Corinthians 10, Matthew 16, in Acts, that Peter had two names, Peter or Cephas, depending on whether you want to use the Aramaic or the Greek, okay? So, no, it's not someone else, it's Peter. I can rest assured that that's the case. Channel, do you have a response to Hartnett and Sabbat, who wrote a counter article to your geocentric model? Yes, I do. And that is on GalileoWasWrong.com. I wrote to them and gave them my response. At least I wrote to Sabbat, and because Hartnett has died, so Sabbat is left, and he's pretty old. But I never did get a response from him. And I think I had his correct address. I don't know, because he was working at some place, I believe, in California, and he could have left that institution and I would never know it. But that's the last address I found on the internet for Sabbat. So yes, I did respond to them in full detail, as I usually do in cases like that. I think it was about 25 pages long, and that was probably about 5 years ago. But I do remember the name Sabbat, and he tried to come in with some highfalutin arguments that didn't amount to too much, so it was not hard to rebut his challenges. And if you would like a copy of that paper, if you can't find it on Galileo Was Wrong, write to me, Sungenis at AOL.com, and I will be glad to send you a free copy of it. Okay, if you're interested. Just remind me of tonight's program, and I'll know who you are, and then we'll take care of you. Dr. Sungenis, is it possible that the participants that don't give their actual names are actually James White and Matt Slick? William, you're at it again. Trying to put on a comedy act. As I tell my sons, keep your day job. All right, here goes. If Christians worship by way of the New Testament as a new covenant from the Old Testament, Jewish and Jews were pagans from before the Old Testament, then who worshiped Yahweh, God, in ancient times? Trying to make sure I understand your question. Well, they weren't called Christians, of course, in the Old Testament. Okay, that was a name that was given in Antioch, Acts chapter 11, to these new believers in Jesus. Okay, so that was a new name. So obviously, they're not going to be called Christians in the Old Testament. What are they going to be? What are they going to be called? Believers? I don't know. There were only Jewish believers at the time, so you call them Jewish believers. When Christ comes, they have a new name, Christians. So I don't understand what you're trying to make some kind of demarcation, I believe, between the new covenant and the old covenant, and trying to give some legitimacy to the Jews in the old covenant as opposed to those in the new covenant. You see, when you can't do that. Okay, when God came to Abraham in Genesis 12, he says, "I'm going to make you the father of many nations." Now, that's the word Gentiles, nations. Okay, I'm going to make you the father of many Gentiles. All right. Now, this is before Abraham was Jewish. He didn't become a Jew until Genesis 17 when he was circumcised. That's the start of the Jewish religion. Prior to that, Abraham was a Gentile. And so naturally, God's going to come to him in Genesis 12:3 and said, I'm going to make you the father of many Gentiles. Yeah, he said it at the right time, before Abraham became a Jew. As a matter of fact, this is the very argument that Paul gives to the Jews in Romans 4, when they claim to be saved because they're children of Abraham. And he says, let me bring you back to history. Let's figure this out, you and I. And he says, when was Abraham circumcised? Before he believed in God or after he believed in God? Before. So he was justified when he was a Gentile, wasn't he? Yeah, I guess so, because he wasn't a Jew yet. Yeah, in Genesis 12 and Genesis 15, Abraham believes God, and it's counted to him as righteousness. That's Paul's whole argument, that Abraham was saved as a Gentile. Okay? And then Paul picks up on that very passage, Genesis 12:3, in Galatians chapter 3, verses 6 to 8, and says, remember what it said back there in Genesis 12, verse 3? And he's talking to the Gentiles in Galatia. And he says God said to Abraham, I will make you the father of many Gentiles. Guess what? You're it. You're the very Gentiles he's talking about. Okay? Galatians 3, verses 6 to 8. So if there was anything, the Gentiles were saved before the Jews were, and that's not only true with Abraham, that's true from the time of Adam all the way through Noah to Abraham. They were all Gentiles. Okay? So if there's anything, the Gentiles hold the weight in the Old Testament, and the Jews come along, 1400, Abraham was a Jew, 2068 or so that he was circumcised, and so that's 2,000 years before Christ, but still, the Gentile world had sway over, if you're going to talk about longevity, they had sway over the Gentile, or the Jewish period. Okay? So, yeah, you got to be careful how you're going to cut these things up, okay? Because you can fall into a trap doing so. Now, I don't know if that's exactly where you intended to go with this question, but I kind of sense that is, and that's why I had to come up with all these other facts in order to explain the situation. Robert, are the books on homosexuality, women wearing head coverings, and mutual submission of spouses available in PDF? I'm pretty sure they are. If you didn't see them on the website as such, you know what? Maybe they're not. And I think the reason why is because they're so cheap. Yeah, because these are like little pocketbooks, and they're like, from $2 to $7, something like that. So I figured, it's better to have the thing right in your hand. Now, except, with PDFs, of course, you can do word searches and things, and yeah, I understand. So maybe they aren't available in PDF, and now you've given me another job to do. So we'll see. Robert, can you explain to me why gyroscopes show rotation of the Earth 15 degrees an hour drift? If we are stationary, then why does it pick up drift? Well, there's all kinds of reasons why that could be the case. There's this thing, speaking of this, and I'll use this as a comparison. What's it called? The Xenakov? I forget how you pronounced it. What happens is, let's say you have a wing nut, okay, and it's screwed on to a screw, and you hit the wing nut, and you make it go fast enough where it flies off the screw and starts to fall to the ground. So let's say the wing nut started like at 3 feet, and you spin it, and it comes off the bolt, comes off the bolt, And it's spinning as it falls to the ground in 3 feet, okay? You know what that wing nut will do? That wing nut will spin about 3 times, and then it will totally reverse itself and continue spinning in the same direction about 3 times, and then reverse itself again and continue spinning and reverse itself until it hits the ground. It'll keep switching back and forth before it hits the ground. Okay? This is an interesting phenomenon, and it's based basically on the centrifugal force that occurs that intensifies as the wing nut is going around, to the point that the centrifugal force takes over the moment of inertia and makes that wing nut swing 180 degrees. Okay? So it has to build up the centrifugal force because it's in rotation, and then that makes it swing. Okay? So, in that sense, the wing nut is a gyroscope, okay, because it's in rotation, and it has moment of inertia all by itself, but yet, because there is a competing moment of inertia, it's going to build up centrifugal force, and it's going to make it flip. So things like that happen, and I don't know if that applies to the thing I'd have to go study this in order to offer, a cogent explanation for it, okay? But that's something that I just explained that comes close to that, okay? Gyroscopes can be funny things, and they act in very strange ways because of those inertial forces that are involved. And, even if you just deal with Newtonian mechanics, we still don't know a lot, okay? A lot of scientists don't know how gyroscopes work, because there has to be some kind of absolute that the gyroscope is gyrating against, if you want to put it that way. What is it? And, that's what drove Ernst Mach to say, look, we're surrounded by a gravity field from the stars that determines how these gyroscopes are going to act, and that's the absolute that they're moving against. He could figure out no other way to explain it. Okay? So, yeah. But, so that's as much as I'm going to say about that right now, but it's a lot more complicated than most people think. Yeah, well, and as a matter of fact, the drift, Newton said that a center of mass is going to drift in a straight line. Well, what's making it drift in a straight line? He didn't have an explanation for it. He just says that's what's going to happen. So, yeah, again, it's very, very complicated. And you would say, so you're asking, why do gyroscopes show drift when we are supposed to be stationary? Well, the Earth can be stationary based on its own environment. That is, being the center of mass for the rotating universe. But that doesn't mean you can't have local phenomenon based on gyroscopes that are going to be opposite that. Okay? I mean, we have the moons going around Jupiter. Why are they going around Jupiter? If the Earth is the center of mass in the universe, because you have a local independent frame. And gyroscopes are going to act in that frame dependent on the conditions of that frame, whatever that frame offers them. Okay? So it doesn't mean anything that because there's a drift, the Earth can't be stationary. I mean, you just can't make that kind of argument. Let's see what else we got. Do you think that the diamonds are right, that the Protestant separation from... Yeah, your English is wrong here. So, do you think that the diamonds are right, that the Protestant separation of justification and regeneration, sanctification, is the biggest problem for Protestantism? You know, how do you put these things on the scale? It's definitely a problem. I pointed it out myself, and not by faith alone, but whether that's their biggest problem, no, their biggest problem is they don't like the Pope. That's their biggest problem. Okay? That's the problem of the Eastern Orthodox. That's the problem with the Protestants. That's a problem with the Muslims, and that's a problem with the Jews. They don't like the Pope being in authority. Okay? That's a problem with American Christianity. That's a problem with a lot of bishops today. You know, the Pope has always been a problem. And, you know, you can be the sweetest, nicest Christian possible and still hate the Pope. Okay? It's just the nature of the beast. And, you know, that's why when the popes laid down the law, they said, look, like me or not, fact is, I'm the vicar of Christ on earth, and you're going to be obedient to me, or else you can't be saved. Okay? That's their biggest problem, I think. All right. I think I better go to the board. You guys are having a discussion here. So, you know, you have to excuse me, audience. I'm trying to read very fast here. Okay, so see the discussion going on. All right, can you explain how the Protestants believed in a closed canon, which books are inspired books, both new and old? I've got into multiple conversations with Protestants regarding. I just discussed this last night. So go back and who's asking this question? Rams Farho. Yeah, Rams, go back and look at the earlier discussion. Maybe you came late, but I discussed this earlier. I went through about 15 minutes of that. All right. Somebody says, is there an alternate explanation? Can the Lorentz transformation work without the theory of relativity, as conspiracy of light seems to claim? If so, how? What am I missing? Yeah, Lorentz did not propose relativity. As a matter of fact, he tried to work it out mechanically by saying that the ether put pressure on Michelson's apparatus and smashed the electrons together. And that's why he got a false positive for a stationary Earth. So Poincaré had developed the relativity theory before Einstein. But Poincaré and Lorentz never convinced about, you know, relativity having any explanation for the Michelson-Morley experiment. That was Einstein's baby. He got the relativity from Poincaré, but then he applied it to the Michelson-Morley experiment, which Poincaré didn't do. So, but no, Lorentz had nothing to do with relativity in his explanation. Relativity only came about because Einstein said, look, we have to have an absolute. And so he postulated that light was going to be the absolute. See, this is the thing about relativity. It's so contradictory, so ironic, because relativity needs an absolute. Okay. And Einstein chose light as his absolute. Otherwise, there would be no relativity. Okay. He has to have something, whatever it is, energy, material objects, matter, whatever. He has to have something that he can say is absolute, from which he can measure everything else. And that's what he did with light. He said, light was my absolute, and I'm going to measure everything in the universe by the fact that light's absolute. Now, that was a postulate that he couldn't prove, and that's why he said, we have to assume this is the case in order for relativity to be true. Okay? As ironic as that sounds, the fact is, and this is why we can prove God to people, that God exists, because you have to have an absolute. Somewhere along the line in your argument, it may be sooner or later, but you're going to have an absolute to be able to judge everything else. Okay? And so it applies in a lot of areas, science, religion, everywhere. What do you think of there being an ethnographic flood? So, for example, the water didn't literally go over all the highest mountains, but every nation experienced a flood. Can one hold to this? No. Okay? The language of Genesis 9, 6-9 is very clear that the whole earth was flooded. Okay? The whole earth was flooded. Physically speaking, in physics, if water is always going to go to its lowest point, and it's always going to assume the shape of its container. Okay? So if you have water that's 15 feet above the highest mountain, that means all the water underneath has to already fill all those cracks and crevices and anywhere that gravity is going to pull it before it could ever build itself up to be higher than the mountains. Okay? So that involves the whole world. If there's any place that hasn't been filled with water, that water is, and Noah's land is never going to be able to be 15 feet over the highest mountain. Okay? It's all one big ball of wax. All right. How does the lunar orbit not disprove geocentrism? Or does geocentrism hold that the Earth rotates, but remains otherwise stationary in space, does not revolve? No, as we said before, the correct understanding of geocentrism is the Earth does not rotate and does not revolve. That is, does not revolve around the sun. Rotate means that it's its own entity and goes in a circle by itself. Revolve means it revolves, it goes around a circle against something else. Okay? So it doesn't revolve, it doesn't rotate. The lunar orbit has a lunar orbit. I mean, just like the sun has an orbit. When the universe is going around the fixed Earth, it's pulling the sun with it, but the sun has a retrograde motion. Okay? Where might that come from? Well, possibly the planets that are attached to it. Okay? I mean, God can work it out where there's enough inertial force and enough gravity where the sun, although it goes with the universe on a sidereal cycle, can also have a retrograde motion because all that weight just can't be pulled. Okay? And that's why the sun is going to go in a retrograde motion, and it's going to go through the 12 signs of the zodiac in 1 year because of that retrograde motion. So in a sense, the moon has a retrograde motion. Okay? Once it's given, if we want to apply inertia freely among heliocentrists and geocentrists, once you put that moon in motion, the inertia is going to make it go. And it's not going to stop unless some net external force makes it stop. So, it doesn't disprove geocentrism. It just proves that the moon moves independently on its own, and it also moves independently of the sun and the stars. Okay, so you have three motions there: sidereal, solar, and lunar. Okay, all moving at different rates. All right. Are you a flat earther? No. I wrote a book against flat earthers. a couple of years ago called Flat Earth, Flat Wrong, and you can find that at flatearthflatwrong.com if you want to buy the book. I love your work, Dr. Robert. One big question: what speed would the other outer galaxies travel at to rotate around Earth every day? It would be far higher than the speed of light. No. Okay, so we need to look at this logically. Okay. First of all, it's not the stars; it's the universe. Okay, the whole universe is rotating, and it's carrying the stars with it. So with respect to the universe, the stars aren't moving unless they have proper motion themselves, which a few stars have. But they're in lockstep with the universe, and that the universe basically is carrying the whole star field around the Earth each day. So the stars, in respect to the universe, aren't moving at all. With respect to the Earth, yeah, they're moving. So the big question is, how can the universe rotate? Okay, at that speed in order to complete its sidereal journey in 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.1 seconds. Well, there's no obstacles to it. Okay, if you knew what Einstein said if you have an inertial frame, yeah, you're limited to the speed of light. Okay, but a rotating universe is not an inertial frame; it's a non-inertial frame, because it's an accelerated frame. And in that frame, Einstein said it can go any speed at once. Okay? So right from the big mahout himself, we have verification for the geocentric universe. Okay? And that would have to be the case for Einstein, because he's the one that proposed co-equivalence and covariance equations. What they mean is, you can have either a fixed Earth in a rotating universe, or you can have a rotating Earth in a fixed universe. Either one, general relativity says, is possible. The big question is, which one's right? Yeah, which one is right? Well, we have the Bible, we have the Church Fathers, and we have certain experiments that say, of the two, the one that has the Earth not moving, that's the correct one. Like the Michelson-Morley experiment, you see. And, the Airy experiment, 1871, or the Arago experiment, the 1818. And the, cosmic microwave background radiation, suggesting the Earth is in the center. If it is, it's not moving. Okay, so yeah, we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that says, of the two that Einstein said are possibilities, the one with the Earth in the center not moving, that's the one that looks like it's right. And you have Scripture and the Church and the Fathers to back it all up. So what more do you want? I mean, to me, it's just like, come on, people. All right. So it says I'm almost down to the end here, and I'm trying to get back to the board. All right, you guys are still having a discussion on Mach and physics and all that stuff. Paul, looks like you got an axe to grind here. Somebody mentioned, Luka Popov. That's a good paper to read. Do you have any criticisms of I might have gone through all those questions because I don't know when this thing cut out on me. I just got back to the camera here and it said, you know, I lost my connection. Oh my gosh. So I might have answered all those questions and you guys weren't here to listen. Oh boy. All right, let me go. We got 20 minutes left. Let me see if I can do what I can do here. Dr. Sungenis, if you were going to give your best single piece of evidence for geocentrism to a physicist, what would it be? I used the Michelson-Morley experiment, wondering if you had a favorite. Well, you know, I would use the Michelson-Morley in conjunction with the Michelson-Gale experiment, because to me, that's the clincher. Because Michelson-Morley can't find any evidence in their interferometer for an Earth revolving around the sun. Every time that experiment was done, over 50 years, by about a dozen different experimenters, everybody came way short of the evidence they needed for a revolving Earth. Okay? The highest that was ever gotten was maybe 10 kilometers per second, but you need 30 kilometers per second. Okay? Which means somehow the 10 kilometers you're getting, and that's the highest by Dayton Miller. Somewhere, it's coming from somewhere, and I think I know where it's coming from. Okay? But unless you get 30 kilometers per second, you did not find that the Earth is revolving around the sun. Okay? But the Michelson-Gale experiment of 1925, when they tested for rotation, okay, not revolution of the Earth around the sun, they tested for rotation. And they thought, you know, the Earth was revolving or rotating on its axis, and so they were going to prove that. So they thought. Okay? So they did their experiment in 1925, big write-up in the New York Times. They found exactly the fringe shifts they needed, you know, for 0.49 kilometers per second revolution or rotation of the Earth. All right? But, you know, if you have any brains, you're going to be thinking, well, wait a minute. I used the same principle of light wave interference in my interferometer in 1887 that I used in 1925. The 1887 experiment didn't come anywhere close to the Earth revolving around the sun. But the 1925 experiment gave me almost 100% of the light wave interference I need to show that there's a sidereal rotation. So how do you match those two things up? You can't. Okay, so I think this combination of these two experiments totally falsifies the heliocentric hypothesis. Why? Because the heliocentrists need both a revolution of the Earth around the sun and they need a 23-hour, 56-minute, 4.1 second sidereal rotation of the Earth. And if they're missing one of them, their whole theory is thrown out. You have to have both. Why? Because you have to explain the seasons. That can only be explained by the Earth revolving around the sun in their heliocentric frame. And you have to have the day-night rhythm, which can only be explained by the rotation of the Earth on its axis. But the empirical evidence only gives evidence of one of those, not both of those. So the geocentrist comes along and says, hey, this is made to order for us. Why? Because all we need is a rotation. But it's not the Earth that's rotating, it's the universe that's rotating around the Earth. Voila! That's why Michelson-Gale measured 100% with that 100% accuracy that there's a rotation based on light wave interference. Yeah, so the geocentrist says, hey, this is all the evidence we need. Because we know there's not a revolution of the Earth around the sun because the Earth ain't moving. But we know that because we see the stars and the sun go around us every day, there has to be a rotation. The question is, what's rotating, the Earth or the universe? Okay. Well, and it can't be the Earth. It has to be the universe. And why it can't be the Earth is because you're not going to see the same star formations if it's the Earth. Okay? Because the whole zodiac thing is based on revolution and rotation of the Earth. Okay? That's all fixed. You can't change that. Your model has to match what you see in the sky. All right? That's only going to happen if the universe is rotating and there is a, 47-degree shift in its axis of rotation over a 12-month period or a 6-month period. So every 6 months, it's going to shift 47 degrees, 23 and a half, each of those 47 degrees. That's how you would explain it. And that's it. So, yeah, that's my favorite. Michelson-Morley combined with Michelson-Gale. And the other one that I think is a close first, or should I say second, is the Airy experiment in 1871. Modern science still has not answered the Airy experiment. The only one to attempt an answer was Wolfgang Pauli, and his answer was just, metaphysical, wasn't scientific. And that experiment was ingenious because it used 2 telescopes pointed to one star, and one telescope was filled with water, the other was filled with air. And the theory was that if the starlight's coming into the telescope and the Earth is, here's a telescope and the Earth is rotating, so the telescope is moving away from the starlight that's coming in, well, that means that starlight is going to hit the wall of the telescope and not the eyepiece. And why? Well, because the water is going to slow down the speed of the light as soon as it hits the telescope. And it's going to give it more time to travel through the telescope and thus more time to hit the wall of the telescope if the Earth is actually rotating or revolving. Okay? As opposed to the air-filled telescope where the speed of light is going to be c all the way through, and the likelihood of it hitting the telescope wall is a lot less than it would be for the water telescope. And so basically your control is the water telescope. Does the light hit the wall of a telescope when the starlight goes through the telescope? And what they found was, no, it goes right to the eyepiece. And what does that mean? Well, that means the Earth isn't rotating. Because the Earth, if it's rotating and you have your telescope there, it's rotating, it's going to move the telescope as the starlight's coming in. And it's going to make the starlight hit the wall of the telescope. Very simple. And that's why they call it Airy's failure. It's been dubbed that since the time it was done. It's a total failure because they were trying to use it to prove that the Earth does rotate. Because they expected the starlight, the beam of the starlight, to hit the wall of the water telescope. And it didn't. So there you have it. As a matter of fact, it's probably my favorite. I should talk about Airy's failure more than I do. Because they just haven't been able to answer that one. All right. If a child has not been baptized and asked to be baptized, does this child have baptism desire prior to? Wait. Okay. If a child has not been baptized and asked to be baptized, a child, does this child have baptism of desire prior to baptism? Baptism of desire is what they call a posteriori. Okay? You can only judge whether a person had it or not after the fact. You can't judge it before the fact. Okay? So you wouldn't be able to put it in the formula you just did. You can't have baptism of desire until after the whole thing is adjudicated and you say, okay, he had baptism of the Messiah, because there's no need to do that. If he's baptized, then that takes all the other ramifications out of the question. Okay, so your question is like anachronistic. Okay, you're putting the cart before the horse. Can't do that. All right, First Amendment compatible with Catholic teaching. I already answered that tonight. I hope you guys heard it. I hope I wasn't cut off before that. Because I gave a long, detailed answer on that one, and I'm not going to do it again, that's for sure. My very first question for Dr. Sungenis, this comes from Happy's Word. Okay, Happy. Why is there no mirth in the Bible? Or is there, and I missed it? And I hope you will not say, because it isn't necessary for our salvation. No, I promise I won't say that. No mirth in the Bible. Well, relatively speaking, there is some mirth. Okay, not very much. I would agree with you. See, unfortunately, God takes our sin very seriously. So almost every story that's told in the Bible is dealing with our sin. Or near sin, or the possibility of sin. Okay? So you go through Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Abraham, Moses, whoever it is, David. Yeah, all the sin in their life is brought to the fore. Okay? And all the sins of the people they had to deal with. Okay, because sin is a serious situation. And God has to bring it to us in graphic language in order for us to even start reading it. Okay? So, yeah, that's why it's not filled with mirth. It's not until the sin is dealt with that there is some joy. And that comes in the last two chapters of the whole Bible. Apocalypse 21 and 22. A lot of mirth there. Because all the sin of this cursed world is over with. Okay? So you really can't have the joy until the sin's dealt with. And, you can't fill the Bible with all kinds of fluff. It's big enough as it is. You got to fill it with the most important stuff. And all that stuff happens to deal with sin in every single generation. Like the kings of Israel, for example. Every one of them from the north. Did you ever read that? First Kings, Second Kings. So-and-so died and was laid with his fathers, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So there you have it. His whole life's wrapped up in his epitaph. He did evil in the sight of the Lord. And that's true for all 20 kings of Israel. Not much mirth in that, is there? Okay. And then we get to Solomon. There's a little mirth in the Song of Solomon, the Canticles. Talking about his lover. Okay, some mirth there. But then this guy Solomon died an apostate because he got so involved with women that he lost sight of his faith. He lost his faith and began to worship other gods. So what little mirth you find in one of his books is overshadowed by, the rest of his life. So you do find a little mirth in the Psalms. David is filled with joy over the thought of God. Okay, so you can find a lot of joy in the Psalms because of that. But then again, the next Psalm is going to talk about David praying to God to save him from his enemies. Almost every Psalm. Save me from my enemies. Sometimes I read the Psalms and go, how many enemies does this guy have? It's like, holy moly. As the king of Israel, you would develop that many enemies? Well, yeah, even his sons became his enemies. And of course, David, had a hand in why that came because of his own sin with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. So, yeah, even the guy that gives us some joy in the Psalms is the very guy that sinned and ruined his life and a lot of other people's lives. So there you have it again, the sin. It's always there. Okay? God destroyed the whole world in Noah's day because of the sin of man. And he was the very opposite of mirth when he said in Genesis 6, verse 5 and 6, I regret that I made man on the earth, and I'm grieved to my heart. Not much mirth there. Okay? So, you know what? Happy's word. I'm just glad that we're just here like a vapor of smoke, a vapor of steam. Here 1 second, gone the next. That's what this life is going to be compared to when we end up in eternity, like a vapor. So, yeah, not filled with much mirth, but the mirth comes in the fact that it's not going to go on very long. It's all going to end. And we're all going to be taken to that happy place for eternity. Okay? Hope that makes you feel better. All right. As a Catholic, do you believe in ghosts? No. Now, we do believe in evil spirits, okay, who can come in apparitions, they can possess people, things like that. That's what we believe in. But if you're talking about, people that have died and come back as a ghost or something like that, no, it's not true. Now, the devil may appear, like you think it's a ghost. If he thinks you believe in ghosts, and work on that to try to deceive you. Okay? He's not stupid. He's going to take your worst fears or your worst images and maybe make you trip and fall based on those. Okay? So don't delve into them. All right? It's like, Ouija board. If you don't want to be a victim to what the Ouija board's going to tell you, then don't use the Ouija board. Okay? As soon as you you put your fingers on that thing, and it starts playing tricks and moving places where you haven't moved it, yeah, well, that's because you delved into it. Okay? Stay away. Stay away. And those things won't bother you. Okay? The devil's just waiting for you to push the right button, so to speak, so he can enter in. Another sad story to tell. Are you familiar with Vatican II document Intermerifica? From what I understand, the Catholic Church does not support free speech. Well, for all the reasons I gave, and I hope you guys were there listening, I hope I wasn't cut off. Yeah, she doesn't she doesn't support the understanding of free speech that's in the First Amendment because it has no parameters around it. Okay? The First Amendment allows free speech for almost anything. And you could talk about, Marxism or atheism or pornography or, gambling or whatever you want, because that's free speech. Well, the church says, no, your free speech you have free speech because you can come and object to the church, according to Canon 212, and tell the pastors, hey, I think you made a mistake here. That's free speech. Okay? But there are parameters around that free speech. You can't go curse out your bishop, give him some few choice words, all right? And you can't talk about, atheism and teach that to your fellow parishioners, although that would be free speech under the First Amendment of the United States, okay? So in that sense, the church is against free speech, okay? But not free speech per se, where you would be limited from even objecting to your pastor or the Pope about certain things that have been done, okay? We do have that right. So in that sense, we do have a form of free speech. All right. What are your thoughts on Taylor Marshall joining Team Trump to focus on getting Catholics to vote for Mr. Trump? I'm all for it. I didn't know that's what he was doing, but I'm all for it. Look, we escaped a bullet the last time in 2016. As many flaws as Donald Trump has, no one I know of who has any sense wanted to see Hillary Clinton become president. Okay? Same thing this time around. Joe Biden is not a Catholic. Joe Biden is a pretender. And Joe Biden is going to listen to all the liberal wing of his party. And he's shown that to be the case. And if that's the case, in my mind, he has no credibility at all. Okay, he's a total hypocrite as far as I'm concerned. Donald Trump has done more to preserve Christianity in our day than any president I've had the experience to witness. And I've gone through many of them. Okay, even the great Ronald Reagan. The things he's done for us as Christians, unmatched. Okay? So the things he saved us from these liberal Democrats who are bent on revolution. Okay, so to me, there's no contest. So I applaud Taylor Marshall for what he's doing. All right? Oscar says, good evening, Dr. Sungenis. I know that the Tychonic and Copernican models are kinematically and geometrically equivalent, but what I was wondering if by putting Venus in the right place behind the sun in the Ptolemaic model, we would still be able to see the phases of Venus, just like the Tychonic model. Well, Oscar, when we say putting Mars and Venus in the right place, we're talking about the Tychonic model. Okay? That's the only way it's going to work. The only way you're going to be able to see the phases of Venus. So, that's just the way it is, okay? So, it doesn't mean that Ptolemy had another place he could put Mars and Venus besides what Tycho had given us. It means that Ptolemy would have seen that Tycho's model was the correct model, and therefore Mercury and Venus would be in a different place than what Ptolemy had put him in. Okay? That's what I mean. Okay. DD says, Mary suffered of sin. The day of Mary's earthly death, she was assumed, body and soul, into heaven. No corruption of her body. Well, that's a matter of opinion there, DD. The church does not say there was no corruption of her body. The church just says she was assumed into heaven. The fact that she died, okay, means her body suffered under the repercussions of Adam's sin. That's the only point I really wanted to make, okay? And you know, Mary had certain diseases, I'm sure, and she got sick, and she, you know, might have stubbed her toe here and there, and, you know, might have cut herself cooking sometimes, who knows, okay? But, you know, her body was going to be subject to the ramifications of the curse of sin that was put on the earth, okay? So that's the major point I wanted to make. Now, the church doesn't go into the corruption issue, okay? But you may be correct. You know, maybe she wasn't corrupted. You know, if Jesus wasn't corrupted in body when he laid in the tomb for 3 days, possibly that can apply to Mary too, okay? So I have no qualms about it. I'm just saying that in order to say that, we're going to need some more information, which we don't have. All right. Are you saying that Mary physically died? What about the Assumption of Mary? Yeah, Mary physically died. The Pope did say that. And then she was assumed into heaven. Okay? So that's what I'm saying. Is it licit to write a story where God created the world we live in to show Satan that he is the one true God, and he can create limited free creatures who love him? Okay, let me read that again. Is it licit to write a story where God created the world we live in to show Satan that he, God, is the one true God, and he can create limited free creatures who love him? I'm not quite sure what the difficulty would be there, Nidrish. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're getting at here. I mean, by and large, it seems to me legit, okay, licit to write a story like that. Yes, as long as you stay within the parameters of our Catholic doctrine, you know, I don't see anything wrong with that. So, at least not that's hitting me right now, unless there's some kind of detail here you're not giving me, okay? All right, so the next question is, all right, so look, well, this is what I'm going to do. It's past 10. What I'm going to do is I'll spend, you know, another 25 minutes trying to answer these questions, because I don't know how long I was off the air, because I didn't have my screen in front of me. All I had was the questions that were asked yesterday, which I spent quite a long time trying to answer. So I'll spend a little bit more time today. I do seem to have a little bit more energy tonight for some reason. And maybe this is just it, so let's use it. Dr. Sungenis, what do you think of Dr. Fauci's recommending we should wear goggles now, after originally saying, backed up by the manufacturers of the mask claims that masks don't work? This just proves to me that Dr. Fauci doesn't know what he's talking about, okay? I mean, it was easy for him to see that masks don't work from the very beginning. We're talking about a virus that's so small, you can hardly see it under a microscope. So how is a mask with holes in it going to stop you from either breathing out the virus to somebody else, because it's going to go right through the holes of the mask, if not through the mask itself? How is it going to stop anything? Okay? So, the whole thing he just proving to us was a facade right from the beginning. And he's controlled by somebody. And social distancing isn't going to work either. Because if these viruses are hanging in the air, if they're, as they say, they're communicated through the air, You think that virus is going to drop to the ground when you come up to 6 feet less or 6 feet or less to somebody? No. You're going to be in the same area that we're all breathing. It's all there. There may be some that drop to the ground, but others are going to be still floating in the air. That's what viruses do, because they're so light compared to the particles in the air. They can stay in the air for hours before actually falling. Okay, so they should have known this from the beginning. What my big beef is, they have a cure. And they have a prophylactic. They have a preventative medicine called hydroxychloroquine that somebody somewhere doesn't like being advertised because it's been proven to cure the coronavirus, at least in the early stages, and is a preventative from getting it. And they know exactly how it works. Okay? The hydroxychloroquine goes in there and it makes a hole so that the zinc can get in there and stop the coronavirus from doing its damage. So that's why you take hydroxychloroquine with zinc. And you might take the azithromycin because, it has an antibody. And it's been working like a charm all over the world. You can get it in various places of the world, but you can't hardly get it in the United States. Why? Because they put a moratorium on it. As I was saying earlier, maybe you guys didn't hear this, but the most prestigious medical journal in the world, Lancet, had accepted an article that was making derogatory remarks about hydroxychloroquine, and they found out that the people who wrote it were all liars and used fake data, and they withdrew it 2 weeks after they had accepted it. This is the most prestigious journal in the world, medical journal. What they say goes, basically. So they withdrew this article because there was no evidence of any diverse effects from hydroxychloroquine. And then they did studies. These institutions supposedly did studies on hydroxychloroquine to find out whether it's dangerous or not. And what did they do? They gave the subjects 2,400 milligrams of this stuff instead of the recommended 200 milligrams. And then, so then they had side effects. And then, you see, hydroxychloroquine gives side effects. Yeah. When you give, 10,000% more than what's supposed to be giving. All right, so there's a big battle going on, okay? And it's all political. Okay? And this is why Trump is putting Fauci on the side politely. Because he knows there's an agenda afoot. And that's because there's an election coming up in November. And the Democrats want to blame. They didn't win with the impeachment. They didn't win with the Russia hoax. They didn't win with the border crisis. And they're not winning with anything else. And this is their last-ditch effort. They want to blame, as Nancy Pelosi has said, they want to blame the coronavirus on Trump. They call it the Trump virus now. Instead of the Chinese virus where it came from, the Trump virus. Leave it to Nancy Pelosi. Okay, so Trump senses all this. Look, he's played this game a long time. He's had some bad boys in his past that he had to survive, and he survived them. He's a survivor. And he's going to survive these bad boys too. You can depend upon it. And he needs your vote to help him do that. Otherwise, you're going to be at the mercy of these lunatics who are going to tear this country apart. Okay? No questions. All right. Breitbart does not run Bitchute. Okay, sorry about that. Because they were at the end of that video, they were saying, Breitbart has some more videos for you. So, we need to find out about that. So thank you Indeedish. At what point do people realize that we're living in the Weimar Republic and people with tiny hats are trying to recreate World War II down to using the exact same boogie bear? Well, you said it all there, sweetheart. So, yeah, same things are happening all over again, aren't they? Okay. So Horizons Daily comes in. Okay, yes, Mary died and her body was assumed. Yes. What do you think of Fiona Hill minutes during the impeachment, saying that Soros conspiracy theories are the new protocols of the elders of Zion? Yeah, well, you know, the fact that she knows George Soros is there funding Antifa and all these other, you know, vigilantes. You know, you got to expect this. They're going to push back. Okay. You know, they're trying to nip it in the bud because they know what's coming. It always comes. And, yeah, so she's just singing the tune that she has to sing in order to postpone the inevitable. All right. And the fact that she would associate Protocols of Zion with George Soros means she knows what's going on. Okay. What was it? Who's that guy? Gilbert, the comedian. Gilbert talks real funny. At one point he said, ha ha, Hitler, we won and the Jews rule the world. Well, that says a whole mouthful, doesn't it? So, yeah. It's going to come to a head, believe me. It's going to come. All right. Doctor says, what do you think about Gates and Bloomberg putting together Event 201 in October 2019, which was a war game over what to do if there was a worldwide coronavirus outbreak? Yeah, well, that means they knew it all along. You know, this Gates guy, you know, he's the guy that went into Africa and dosed the vaccines he was giving them with abortifacients and thought he was doing them a favor until they kicked him out. He's not allowed in Africa anymore, at least some of the nations. So this guy is sinister. You know, the money he's made has gone to his head. He thinks he's God, and he's going to tell you how to live. And he's going to use all his money to help facilitate his ideology. Okay? So that's who he is. Bloomberg, yeah, same thing. There's many other people that are involved in this. So beware. Okay? It's coming. These are the revolutionaries. And it's happened in the past. It's going to happen now. Okay? Some things never change. Recently, I've watched a documentary called Is Genesis History, where a group of scientists actually believe, by the evidence on Earth, that Noah's flood might have occurred. Well, they can join the club anytime they want. It's pretty obvious. There had to be a catastrophe. Okay? Dr. Sungenis, Inspiring Philosophy, YouTube channel, 150K subscribers, has a video defending the idea the flood in Genesis was a local flood, theistic evolution, and idealism. Would you debate it? Anytime. Anytime. I'd love to get the word out there. So if you want to arrange it, let me know. How do we know geocentrism is true? Well, we know it's true because the church has said so. The Bible says so. Our patristic history says so. And science says so. You don't need much more than that. Okay? Got it all there. Do you know anything about positive words creating isometric shapes, while negative words create chaotic shapes? I do know that water, believe it or not, at least what I read in the book, okay, reacts to classical, nice, smooth classical music by creating beautiful crystals, as opposed to hearing, hard metal rock music and creating distorted crystals. Now, that may just be a physical phenomenon, and I would say it is. But they have evidence that this is the case. So I wouldn't be surprised, if something like you're describing is true. Although I believe that there would be a rational explanation to it. It's not magic. It's not, the devil. It's just the nature of things, the nature of how things are built. Okay, that would be my first line of examination. Parkinson's disease is being cured in Europe by use of ultrasound frequencies to break up the blood-brain barrier. Test trials will not take place in the United States because pharmaceutical companies will only approve with application of pharmaceutical drugs. All right, and that just proves my point, okay? Because back when John Paul was made, a saint based on Parkinson's disease being cured, I don't think this was available, okay? At least I didn't read anything about that being available. And if it was used, that means it wasn't a miracle, was it? Okay, so, yeah, the whole thing stinks all the way around. Okay, there's no devil's advocate, and there's only one miracle, and it's flimsy from the beginning. So, if that's what sainthood has been reduced to in the Catholic Church, we got a lot of problems. All right. If sainthood isn't infallible, what happens when one prays to a bad saint? How does this mesh with what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven? Seems scary. All right. Good question. Your prayer will be used for someone else. Okay? No prayer is going to be wasted. God will use it for some. Let's say you pray for somebody in purgatory and they've already been released from purgatory. Well, that prayer will be used for someone else in purgatory at God's discretion. It's called the treasury of merit. Okay? So all the merit is there, and God determines how to cut the pie, so to speak. Okay? That's all in His realm. So you will never be wasted. Okay? Now, on the bind on earth, bound in heaven thing, okay, now let's look at this. A very important question. So Jesus says to Peter, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay? And I've used that to say that since heaven can't lie, that means heaven will never bind something that is a lie made on earth. Because by doing so, heaven itself would be lying. If it bound a lie, it would be culpable. Okay? So that's how important that verse is for papal infallibility. Okay? But listen to the first part of the verse. It says, whatsoever you bind. Okay, the word whatsoever is actually the Greek words eon, which means whatsoever you bind. So let's say Peter says, well, I'm going to make a statement about, some subject, but I'm not going to bind the Catholic faithful. Okay. Well, that puts it in a whole different category. Okay. To bind the faithful means that they are required to obey this particular teaching. Okay. Which means it better be true. Okay. And because that's the case, then heaven can come in and bind it also because it's true. But let's say there's in the whatsoever definition, Peter says, well, we're not going to bind this one. We're going to teach it, but we're not going to bind it just yet. That's happened many times in Catholic history. Okay? Like the Assumption of Mary, for example. Okay? Or the Immaculate Conception. A lot of doctrines like that. The canon of Scripture wasn't bound infallibly until 1563 at the Council of Trent. There were other councils prior, Council of Rome, 380, Council of Carthage, 419, Council of Hippo, Council of Florence. They all had the same canon of Scripture, but it wasn't made infallible. It wasn't bound yet. Okay, it was in the whatsoever category because the church can talk authoritatively about it, but not bind it. Okay, so that means, heaven's not responsible. Because let's say, the church said, hey, there's another book to be added to the Scripture. We found another book in the Qumran caves or something. Okay, which means the canon, wasn't the whole canon yet. There are letters in the New Testament that Paul mentions. We have never found them. The first letter that he wrote to Corinthians. Okay, in other words, 1 Corinthians, there's actually a letter before 1 Corinthians, which would have been 1 Corinthians if we had found it. Okay, there's the letter to the Laodiceans he mentions in the book of Colossians. Never found it. Okay, so there was the possibility that there could be more to the canon than we had. And the church would have to make a decision on that. Okay. So we waited 1,500 years, figured, okay, we're not going to find those books. Now we can bind the canon. Okay. So there you have a situation where it's authoritatively taught. Like, if you're going to use the Bible, here's the one that the tradition has given us. So let's use this one. Okay. This is what we're telling you. You can have that kind of situation, or you can have a situation where the church actually binds it. It's a big distinction there. Okay. The church basically determines what level of authority she wants to give to a particular teaching. All right. So that's why it shouldn't be scary to us, because unless she binds a doctrine that says canonizations are infallible, then they are possibly fallible. Okay. Not scary. They're just protecting us. Okay. So that's the way the Holy Spirit is led. That's what we'll accept. All right. What are your thoughts on E. Michael Jones, specifically on the God-chosen people and their revolutionary spirit? Paramedic is your name. Michael Jones, probably one of the greatest intellects I've ever met in my life. He is not just a data collector, he's a dot connector. Michael has exceptional ability to connect the dots and to tell you what the true story is. And that includes the chosen people. Okay. There's a whole history you need to read about the so-called chosen people, what they've done, where they've come from, how they've operated in society. You start with the Bible, you find out quite a few things, and God himself rejected them. Okay, so what does that tell you? That even the patience of God couldn't put up with them. All right, not all of them. There was a remnant that
come thick or thin, they followed God and they became the greatest Jews we ever know today. Okay? As a matter of fact, they should call him Saint Abraham. But by and large, most of them, not your model citizens. Okay? And so Michael goes through the whole history of that in our present day, up to our present day, and not much has changed. Okay? So, look, these are the facts. Go read the book. Find out for yourself. Facts don't change. Facts reveal the truth. And so there you have it. All right, Shannon says, why did God just not create all humans and angels that he knew would be saved, rather than all of the good and bad and the ugly too? So Nidrish comes in and says, I've thought a lot about that. My answer is that I wouldn't be able to prove I had free will if everyone was good. I think that's a great question and can't wait to hear the answer. See, God is a God of honor. He's a God of honesty. And to make a being that automatically worships him is not honorable. Okay? And it's not honest. So in order for God to create, he's going to have to create the honest way and the honorable way. As a matter of fact, honor is probably one of the highest virtues of God that doesn't give him a lot of consideration. But this is the whole reason for the atonement. Why did Jesus have to die on the cross? What does that do? You ever think about that? What does killing your own son on the cross have to do with anything? Well, here's what it has to do with. The honor of God. Yeah, that's why Jesus died. Okay? For the honor of God. A man spit in God's face, and so a man is going to have to restore the honor that God had prior to that. And that was Jesus. You see, that's what it's for, to preserve the honor of God. We don't talk much about honor in our society, but honor traditionally was one of the highest virtues that someone could have. Okay? Reputation, honor, all the things that go with that. Okay? So, making a man that acts like a robot just bows down, when prompted to, that doesn't give you honor. It's not honorable. When a man of his own free will does it, and he considers the cost of doing it, and the persecution he's going to get, and the poverty he might have to live in, and the bereavement that he's going to get, and he still worships you, well, that's honorable. That's something God can live with. Okay? Why do you think he put Job through all that stuff? This is a question of honor. Okay? God's the one who challenged the devil. After the devil said, I've been walking to and fro, looking at man. Said, have you ever seen my servant Job? Yeah. So Job's puzzled at the whole thing. Why? Because he doesn't understand that God's doing this for his own honor. That's the most important thing to God. Okay? So, yeah, you can't have honor if you don't create beings with free will. You might as well just forget it. It's not worth it. Okay? So, that's the reason. Because of who God is. All right? Okay.
Dr. Sungenis, my neighbors are Mormons currently on their mission. What advice do you have for me to them when they come knocking on my door? William, you know what? I have two opinions on that one. One is allow them to come in. The other is shut the door and tell them never to come back. It depends on what day of the week it is, which one I'm going to use. Okay. The last time I had Mormons in my house, two young girls, like in their 20s, innocent looking, just full of, I want to do this and I'm going to bring my best to you. And I said, all right, come on in, let's talk about it. So I'm going through it for about an hour and a half with them. And I got them to the point where they're like saying, yes, that's true. Yes, what you're saying is true. Yes, all this. And I'm thinking, wow, this one's a slam dunk. And I had them theologically pinned against the wall. And I'm thinking this is going to be over real short. And the only one of them was talking. The other was just listening, And so the hour and a half has passed. And she goes, yeah, well, you really gave me a lot to think about. And I said, gosh, she's just going to fall on her knees now. And can I join the Catholic Church, please, please? And the next thing she says, but we're going to leave now. And I suggest that you read the Book of Mormon and maybe you'll find the answers that you need. So at that point, I realized I just wasted an hour and a half of my time. And this girl had come in with the agenda of, because somebody had told her, whatever they say to you, say, oh yeah, you're right. I agree. You're right. And at the end, she pulls the floor out from under you and says, now make sure you read the Book of Mormon now, and you'll find all the answers that you need. And then I proceeded to politely lead them outside the door. All right. So, they're trained very well. So I'll hesitate the next time they come to my door. I'll have to be more discerning of who I'm dealing with. But yeah, that's my last experience. That happened about a year ago. I still haven't forgotten it. All right. Dr. Sungenis, the Orthodox allow children the Eucharist. What do you think of this practice? It's wrong. Okay. This is another reason why they should have never left the Catholic Church. If there's anything that St. Paul makes a big deal of, it's making sure you receive the Eucharist worthily in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. That's where the church gets its teaching. And he says to the Corinthians, the reason some of you are sick and some of you have died is because you've taken the Eucharist unworthily. Okay? So it's serious business. Do you receive the Eucharist in mortal sin or not knowing what you're receiving? You're in trouble. Okay? And Paul makes a big deal of that. So how can a child, 3 years old, 2 years old, possibly know what the Eucharist is? Unless she's given some kind of, intrusion of the Holy Spirit infused with knowledge. All right. But who does that happen to? Hardly anyone. So these kids are receiving the Eucharist and don't know what they're receiving. That's receiving unworthily, according to St. Paul. One of the forms of receiving unworthily. There's other ways to receive it unworthily, but that's one of them. Okay? So no, it's totally wrong. All right. this might be more understandable. Many non-Catholic churches only allow adult baptism or after the person can reason. Why does the Catholic Church encourage infant baptism? Well, you're implying that, there is no faith in the infant that's baptized, but the church says that the parents are the ones with the faith. And with the promise that they will raise the children in the faith. Okay, so there is faith there, just as the Baptists claim when they have an adult baptism. If the parents don't believe, okay, then you got problems. But and that's why you have a sponsor for, godfather, godmother, because if the parents don't fulfill their commitment to hold up the faith, then you got the godfather and the godmother to do it. Okay, so the church tries to make sure that there's always faith for that child that's receiving baptism. Okay. Now look, baptism is given because of original sin. And what does original sin do? Well, it condemns you in sin and death for eternity. All right, so the remedy has to be given to that. And God's providing it in baptism, just like he provided it with circumcision. So that's the paradigm that we start with. God said the baby has to be circumcised at 8 days old to become part of the covenant. So it's God himself that gave us the paradigm. Why would we want to do something else? Okay, so that's what the church is doing. It's following the paradigm that was given. Because God himself is the one who gave it. Okay? Even with the Passover, the Jewish children would receive the Passover. Okay? Not that this was the same thing as, the Eucharist, but as part of the covenant ritual, they would receive the Passover. And then it says in Exodus 12, and then when the child asks you, Daddy, why are we eating this Passover? And then you tell him, it says. But the Passover, as part of the covenant ritual, wasn't forbidden to him before he had the knowledge to understand it. So again, we have that same paradigm from the Old Testament. So the church picks that up and says, okay, well, we have to be very judicious about this, but this is the paradigm we follow. Unless there's an exception to the rule, as there would be for the Eucharist, okay, children are just as much of the covenant as their parents are, okay, based on the paradigm that the Bible already gave us. So, what do you think about Dr. Krauss being fired for sexual harassment? Was he actually fired for that? I know I heard something. I just didn't know how deep it went. So he doesn't work at Arizona State University anymore? Is that what you're saying? Wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, I know about him going to Epstein's Island. We were going to write a story about that like 7 years ago when he was giving us such a hard time with the principal. But we didn't, want to fight tit for tat at that point. But yeah, I knew that he's got a checkered background in that area, that's for sure. So pray for him, he needs it. I'm looking for a question here. Okay. What do you think of preterism? Jerry Wirt says. I think it's wrong. Okay. This whole attempt to make the apocalypse an historical event, no, that's the wrong way to go. Okay. Church under Augustine gave us the amillennial position, and that's been our go-to eschatology for 1,500 more years. It was endorsed by the Council of Ephesus, who said the binding of Satan occurred at the cross, not sometime in the future, not sometime in the past, prior to the cross. But I think the problem with preterism, I think, is that they're looking for exact historical events to fulfill the prophetic statements in the apocalypse that are highly symbolic. And what happens is you get into a guessing game. What does this symbol represent? What historical event does that represent? And all this. And instead of looking at these symbolic statements as general statements of what's going to happen in the church continually until the end of time. Okay, there's a big difference in that exegetical standpoint. Okay, in the one, you're looking for a one-to-one correspondence, and in the other, you're looking as prophecy being general statements of what continues to happen throughout the time that we're living here, basically. Okay. Now, there are some instances where the apocalypse does get into specific historical events, like Apocalypse 20 in the 1,000 years. Here's the problem. You have to start the 1,000 years from some point, either in the Old Testament, at Jesus' first coming, or Jesus' second coming. You got three choices. Okay, and only three choices. And then you have to decide, or maybe before that, you have to decide, is the 1,000 years symbolic or literal? Okay. And, the preterists are going to say it's literal. And, the amillennials are going to say, no, it's not. It's symbolic. It's obviously symbolic. And, there the division occurs. Okay. And somehow they want, the preterists are usually people that are, they want to somehow revive the Jews. They somehow believe that when God rejected the Jews in the coming of Jesus, that somehow he's going to redo all that and make it all better. Okay, that's what they're looking for. And most of these are preterists. So, as our early fathers were, they were preterists. And, the church rejected that idea. Okay? So the focus is not on the Jews. The focus is on the church. The church has replaced the Jews as the people of God. And there's nothing further for the Jews. As a national ethnic entity, there's nothing further coming for them. Okay? The only thing that is available for them is for them to be placed back into the olive tree by coming to Jesus Christ and accepting him for who he is. And that's only going to occur for a remnant of Jews. Paul already stated that about 3 times in Romans chapter 11. And you can add 9 and 10 to that, Romans 9 and 10. Same thing. All Israel is not Israel, okay? From Romans 9:6 all the way to, Romans 11:14, where he says, I hope to save some of my brethren. He doesn't have any illusions of grandeur, but the preterists do. Somehow they think God's going to fix it all for the Jews, and the prophecy of the apocalypse is generated with, focus on the Jews. Yeah. Okay. It's just, that's a rabbit trail that you don't want to go down. Right? Okay. All right, Shannon and Nadrish are having a discussion here. So, we gather one says, how could some mortal sins be abrogated by popes? Well, if they find out that the criterion for a mortal sin wasn't fulfilled, that's how they would do that. Okay, and that's the only way they could do it. If it's a true, legit mortal sin, no pope can take it away. Okay, the only thing he can do is absolve you of the sin if you repent of it in the confession, just like a priest would do. That's it. Okay, but he can't turn a mortal sin into no sin. Okay, that can't happen. All right. All right, you guys are continuing to have a discussion here. If the early church, Daniel says, if the early church fathers taught geocentrism, why is the Vatican not going along with geocentrism now? I don't mean to laugh, Daniel, but to ask that question, you have to be a little naive, okay? And I say that politely to you, okay? The longer you're around, the more you're going to know why the present Vatican doesn't go along with what the fathers say. Okay, it's just something you're going to have to learn on your own. The state of the church today is not good. Okay, yet even then we get glimpses of the fact that the past truths taught by the fathers haunt the Vatican, and they know that further they get away from that pedigree, the more they're going to get themselves in trouble. Okay, every once in a while we see glimpses of that. And, rest assured, the Holy Spirit's still working in the Catholic Church with what he has to work with. It ain't much, but he's still working. Okay, and that's going to be true until Jesus comes back. All right, and there's always hope. Never want to take away hope. It could be that someone rises in the church who's in the hierarchy and says, just like they did back in Josiah's day in the Old Testament, they're going on for years and years and years without the law of Moses. And someone says, and so they go into the back room of the king's palace and they find this book and they bring it out and they go, what's this? Wait a minute. This is the law of Moses. And they go, well, what's it doing back there? Oh, I don't know. How did it get back? I don't know. But look what we've been missing for all these centuries, these decades. And, we got a lot of work to do. No wonder we have all these calamities coming upon us. That's exactly what the book of Moses, Deuteronomy 28, says. You don't do these things, this is what I'm going to do to you. And so there was a revival under Josiah because they found the book of the law. Wow. Well, that's just like the state of the church today. They've forgotten what the fathers said. They hardly pay attention to any of the councils, and they make it up as they go along. Because they want to, rub shoulders with all the other people of the world. The pagans and the, other non-Catholics and the secularists and the scientists. Yeah, they want to be one of the boys. Just like Israel, when they ask for a king. God says, look, they're not asking for a king because they really want a king. They're asking for a king because they don't want me. Okay? So, same thing here in the church. It's going on. We got to wake up to this, okay? We got to preserve what we have left and hope. As I said, there's always hope. Hope that God can help us turn it around. Or Jesus is just going to come back and end it all. Got to end sometime. And it's going to end with a bang. It's going to end with the Antichrist coming, and you think it's bad now. Wait till he comes. All right. Okay. The book, The Glories of Mary, do you believe any part of that book is pure fiction? You mean the one written by Alphonsus Liguori? Yeah. I think some of that's pure fiction. Okay? I mean, Alphonsus Liguori wrote one of the better moral theology books that we've ever had, but when it comes to Mary, he goes off on these spiritual escapades, tangents, and starts talking about things he can't prove. Okay, so yeah, I think there's some fiction there. Okay, I don't like to use the word fiction. I would like to say, exaggerations. What else would you use there? I mean, to be polite to this good saint. But he got enraptured. He just, I don't know how to describe it. Okay. Maybe he had some revelations about Mary that, and if that's the case, hey, all the more power to him. I'll be the first to read them if we can prove that he had some, interlocutions, whatever, from heaven. But that's the hard part, okay? Determining whether that's true or not. And if it ain't true, I'm not going to waste my time, okay? So, I'm trying to tell you the exact truth, okay? I'm not going to mince words here. I'm going to tell you exactly how I feel. That's how I feel. Okay, Paul, you talk about Mach's view, abandoned absolute space and time. That's correct. All right. Why pray to one saint in heaven when you can pray to all of them at the same time? Well, because first of all, this is why certain saints are noted for certain favors that they can do. Like, Saint Rita is the patron saint of impossible situations. I've had a few of those. And I've prayed to her specifically for that. She helped me out of it. Man, did she help me out of it. Turned the whole thing 180 degrees around. Took a little time, but it did happen. Okay? And, but the reason is because certain saints are, like St. Anthony is the patron saint of lost articles. How many of us, how many times have Catholics prayed to St. Anthony? I think St. Anthony gets prayed to more than anybody. Because we're always losing stuff. Okay? So I'm just trying to make the point. And, that certain saints are designated for certain things. That's why we would pray to one. Okay? And don't think that because you pray to all of them that you're going to get your prayer answered any faster. And that's not the way it works. Okay? You guys. When I got cut off, we got it says, was he raptured? He's back. Guess he didn't get raptured. All right, Antonio, I can't believe I'm going on to 11 o'clock. This is our third hour. It looks like I may be a few minutes over that. But let's make the best of it. Antonio says, do you have a book about Father Raymond Brown, the sheep in wolf's clothing? How do you feel about the spread of the modern liberal movement into the Catholic Church?
Antonio, it's one of the saddest stories that I've ever had the displeasure of running into. Father Raymond Brown, to me, was a material heretic. He was very clever, though, unlike Hans Kuhn, who came right out and stated his heresies. Raymond Brown put them in the form of questions so that he could escape censure from the church. So he could spread all his lies and all his doubts about Catholic doctrine, like, the virginal birth, the perpetual virginity of Mary, the papal infallibility, the inspiration of Scripture, second coming of Christ, evolution. This guy had a rap sheet, theologically speaking, that was as long as my arm, and yet he was the president of the Pontifical Biblical Commission in 1992, appointed by John Paul II, and he was one of the worst material heretics I've ever come across in the Catholic Church. Okay, a lot of people loved him, and that's because they're all liberal like him. And he taught at Union Theological Seminary, Protestant seminary, one of the most liberal Protestant seminaries in the world, and still is today. He taught there. Okay, what does that tell you? Yeah, so I've written many papers against Father Brown, and what's it? George Kelly, Monsignor George Kelly, first introduced me to the aberrations of Father Brown many years ago, back in 1997, 98, and he's died since then. But he wrote a book called The New Biblical Theorists, Monsignor George Kelly. Pick up that book. Yeah, you want to hear some wild stories from an intellectual like Monsignor George Kelly, you can still find it on Amazon. I got a copy there. So again, the New Biblical Theorists, Raymond Brown and Beyond is the subtitle. Okay? Do you have any criticisms of the last thing we heard? So we heard everything up until Mach. No, that's a comment somebody made. Is it wrong to consider the extraordinary Mass, or should we embrace the Novus Ordo Mass? Well, look, the Church has given you two Masses. You can pick any one you want. Okay? Some people feel comfortable with what used to be called the ordinary Mass. Now it's called the extraordinary Mass, or the Novus Ordo. Because, look, they both confect the Eucharist. All right? There's really not much difference substantive-wise, except the extraordinary Mass. The traditional Mass has a few more prayers, and the prayers are solid, but they have a few more prayers. The Novus Ordo, the priest is facing the people. The traditional, he's facing away. In the Novus Ordo, you have a lot more responses from the congregation. In the traditional, the priest basically does all the talking. Except when you have a high Mass, you have singing, lets the congregation take place. So there are differences. And, there's differences. I wish we had one. But we don't. We have two, so you can make your choice. But don't think that because you go to the Novus Ordo that somehow you're going to an invalid Mass. Don't listen to those people who talk that way. They're not the Church. Okay? This is what the Church has given us. This is what we will accept. And whether we prefer it or not. Okay? That's the state of the game. So, all right.
looks like I'm getting near the end here. Is the Opus Dei founder a saint? I think he was on the track, wasn't he? What's his name? Escriva? Now, here is an interesting little story. Oh, there are some bad things we know about Monsignor Escriva. Okay, I have an article in my stack over here talking about some very bad things he was into. And yet this man was made a saint. So here's another instance where the evidence is quite apparent. It's been covered up. When you dig hard enough, you can find it. And who is it? Randy Engel? She's written voluminous amounts about Opus Dei and the fact that they're a cult. And then Escriva has a notorious history. So, yeah, there's questions there. Big questions. It's not just from one source. Okay. All right. The Catholic Church let me and my wife as Protestants be godparents. Well, it wasn't the Catholic Church. It was some priest or some person who is purporting to be following the Catholic Church that allowed Protestants to be God. No, that's not allowed. Okay? You don't believe in the Catholic faith. How can you teach someone the Catholic faith if you don't believe it yourself? Then if you do, you're a hypocrite. Okay? I'm just going to tell you straight out. All right? If he's not going to tell you, whoever allowed you, then I'm going to tell you. That's the nature of the game. Okay? If you really want to follow us through, go find someone else who believes in the Catholic faith, and he'll give you the right answer. And he'll tell you that, resign as the godparents and go find some other Catholic people that believe in the Catholic faith to be the godfather and her godmother, or a godmother, yeah. So that's my answer to you. Okay. All right, came to the end. Jose Maria Escriva is canonized. Okay, so there you have it. I knew he was on track, and I didn't know if they did it yet. But all right, there you have it. All right, people. 3 hours and 5 minutes. I've been at this. So here you go. I'll be back next week, Tuesday and Wednesday in August. And looks like those dates will be the 4th and the 5th of August. Okay? And just to let you know, I'll be gone on the week of the last week of August, 24th to 28th. And I'll be gone in September from the 14th to the 18th. So just in case you're keeping tabs. So we will see you again next week, and I hope you enjoyed the program. I'm glad to do it for you. Please pray for me. Pray for everybody on this list who had questions and want to know the truth. We all want to know the truth. Now, don't forget, there's robertsongenis.org right there. Go visit it. Make a donation if you can. And if you can't, that's fine. But if you can also take a look at our books, DVDs, everything, see if there's something there you like. All this is for you, and you help this ministry stay as a viable concern, one that can help you, and continue to do so. All right. So God bless. Take care. We'll see you next time.